Hello, everybody, and Sungates Radio, Sungates Center present program Self-Love and host Marina Kostina and Marina PhD, Master Reiki, and she present her guest. Okay, Marina.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our episode Self-Love, Do It Yourself. Today, we have a very special guest, Anastasia Pryanikova, who is a lawyer, a linguist, who is a coach. She's a certified world-class speaking coach. She was trained by Craig Ballantyne, very famous. She's a co-author of two books, Successonomics and World Class Speaking in Action. And she has appeared as a guest expert on the Brian Tracy show, on ABC, NBC, CBS. I don't even know how she found her time for us today. So we're very, very happy to have her. Good afternoon, Anastasia.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here. I will always find time for you, Marina. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. And we usually talk in this segment about self-love, and Anastasia brings a new perspective because she really is interested in brain and how the brain works. And today we're going to look at self-love through that, through the eyes of the neuroscience. Yeah. So Anastasia, the first question to you. What do you think? Very basic. Well, is it important to have self-love for brain? What do we need to know about the brain in regards to how much we love ourselves or how much esteem we have and things like that?
Well, I think self-love is very important, not only for the brain, but just our whole body, mind, and soul, so to speak. But I agree that the brain can kind of shed an interesting light on maybe this process. And one thing that we do need to know about the brain is to understand how the brain changes and that it is actually possible to change the brain. Because for a very long time, we had a theory, neuroscience offered a theory that the brain was really not changeable. And whatever neurons we were born with, basically after your brain has grown, that's all you've got for life. And you just keep losing it with age. And that was the story.
That's pretty sad, right?
It was, yes. And then in the 70s and 80s, they started doing more research. And what they found is that our brain is actually what they call neuroplastic. And what that means is that the new neurons are born as we live our lives. And to some extent, it's up to us how we use those new neurons. We can use them to build some new habits and hopefully practice self-love. Or unfortunately, we may not do it and just go on our usual default behaviors and habits. And some of them may not be that good, but because they're easy for the brain to maintain, that's what we do.
So Anastasia, can I interrupt you for one second? So you said that we can change at any time. So for example, if I am, I don't know, 55 years old, and all my life I had low self-esteem, do you think I have hope?
I think we all have hope. And I think as we start paying more attention to what it is that we want to change and start incorporating some practices into our life that allows us to change that, I think we do have hope. And that's what neuroplasticity tells us, that the brain can change in response to our environment, to what we do with it, to our current friends, social circuit, and all those things. They all influence the brain. So at least I would say that we have a good shot and we can try it.
That's a great. That's very nice to know. But in reality, when I meet my clients, and I agree with your perspective, but it's just interesting to see your twist on the brain. So when my clients come and they say, I try to do, I don't know, affirmations, meditations, but it doesn't work. So this is how I am. I hear it all the time. This is how I am. Do you have any explanation for this?
Yes, unfortunately, just to understand what the brain is, and we all kind of have an idea that's our operating system, kind of that regulates a lot of processes in our body. But the truth of the matter is that the brain consumes a lot of our energy. 20% of all the nutrients and all of the oxygen that we consume in our bodies from the energetic perspective goes to the brain. What that means is the brain tries to conserve the energy and resources and make as many habits automatic as possible. So it is easy to do what you've been doing. The brain basically says you repeat a behavior once or twice. We like the saying, neurons that fire together wire together. So if you have a behavior that happened once or maybe repeated another time, the brain says, okay, that's easy. It seems like it's a good coping strategy or it's a good reaction. I'm going to automate it. So next time when similar circumstances come up, I'm going to send you on the same default pattern and you're going to do just about the same you've been doing all your life. So that is why it's so hard to change those habits. And that's why we have this very strong feeling, this is our habit. It's hard because the brain doesn't want to change. That's the truth.
So this is why we feel like it's almost that's how we are, but in reality, it's not how we are. It's just a very old habit that we created, right?
Like
and it's very automatic.
Yes, it's like a piece of software. It's a program that we've been running on. But as we start looking into it and say, okay, is it possible to change that program? It is possible, but we need to bring awareness to those habits that we need to change. And we need to institute a process that can help us change it. Because what brain is responsive to is some kind of a cue from the environment that allows us to either act or react, and to the reward that we get as a result of that behavior. So that's how habits are formed. You get a cue, you get action, you get reward. And rewards may not be what we usually think of rewards, good things. Sometimes it's a sense of self-control. Sometimes it's a sense of autonomy. Sometimes it's some kind of a physical reward as good neurotransmitter dopamine, that feel-good molecule floods your body and you start feeling good. And so you want more of it. So those types of the rewards that we're talking about here.
Okay, wonderful. That's very interesting. So, okay, let's get to the point. We all understand that this is a habit, okay, this is how our brain works, but everybody probably wants to know, so what do we do with that? How do we break the habit? And I will give you a couple of small questions so you can answer them in a longer answer. So, how do we break it, right? How many repetitions do we need to have in order to form a new habit? Or maybe time-wise, like for how long do I need to start thinking a new idea, doing something new?
Okay, well, first of all, in terms of developing new habits, we've had all this saying, oh, takes 21 days to break a habit. The start is really, we don't know for sure, but I've seen the numbers that are more like 60 to 90 days, which is longer. Sorry, bad news.
Okay.
So it takes time. I'm not going to fool you and say, oh, it's going to be easy. Just do this and do that. It's going to be easy. No, it takes, as anything in life, if you want to work for it, you need to put some effort. But the good thing to start is to see what it is that you are trying to change, is to understand, because part of the brain is subconscious, and that is the behavior that's not really you're thinking about. Why am I doing it? Why all of a sudden somebody says something and I'm all kind of starting to get agitated? Or why is it that there's a jar of cookies at my workplace and every time I pass that jar, I need to reach for the cookie? You don't think about it, but if you start analyzing your behavior and the environment and the context in which it occurs, oftentimes you find those kind of cues. Maybe I'm stressed, maybe I'm not so much hungry, but I'm bored, or maybe if somebody says something, it reminds me of an episode that happened in my childhood, and since that time, I'm really, really triggered by it. So we kind of start looking at the habits and when they occur and how can we change the context. So sometimes it's taking yourself away from the stressful situation, or maybe putting away and hiding that jar of cookies, or not buying cookies in the house. So we kind of start to manipulate the environment in which the habit occurs. And then a good way to see is to ask yourself, what do I want? What is the response that I want in that situation? And how can I start practicing it? So a lot of it is practice and also rewarding yourself for the so-called good behavior.
Okay, so how do I reward myself? Do I reward myself with, like, for example, I'm trying to get rid of the cookies, but if I do, if I do it well, I'm not going to reward myself with a cookie, right? So how do I know how to reward myself?
Well,
what to reward myself with?
again, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate good that we're giving ourselves when we talk about self-love? Sometimes cookie is okay, and it's okay to accept it, and it's okay to say, I'm not going to judge myself for having a cookie today. But if it's a habit that I want to break, then I'm going to ask you, so why am I having this cookie in this first time, in the first place? Maybe it's because I'm stressed out. What other ways are there that I can relieve my stress? And maybe instead of a cookie, we go and we do, 5 minutes of breathing exercises, or we go outside and walk around the block, if it's a lunchtime, for example. If you are bored and you have cookies around just because you feel bored, then you can look for other things that can sort of stimulate your brain in a way that can help you get the same satisfaction from something interesting, exciting, but it's not going to be food related. So I think in some ways is you have to ask, okay, what do I accept as a good reward? And what kind of trigger will it eliminate or somehow help alleviate? Right? So that's the idea. Because what happens is when we get that reward is our brain releases the so-called good feel molecule dopamine. And dopamine is implicated in so many things and so many behaviors. And love is one of them, but also some of the addictive behaviors such as alcohol and gambling, because it gives us that neurotransmitter and we start feeling better. And what we have to understand is that sometimes we substitute those bad rewards because they give us the same neurobiology, the same sensation in the body for something good. And we have to make a choice. Either we continue with those, unfortunately, bad rewards, but they flush us with feel-good molecules, and that's why how a lot of people get addicted, or we go on a path of self-love and say, what do I really need in this moment? And you talk to yourself lovingly in that moment, because again, you don't want to cause more stress, because stress, unfortunately, especially prolonged stress, is not good for our brains. It's not good for our bodies. Cortisol is really killing those neurons in our bodies. So we have to look for ways to cut on the stress.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. I heard, and this is more from the kind of spiritual already realm, right? I heard that it's very important for the spiral. We have either spiral down or spiral up of our emotions, right? And if we want to change a habit, we want to, of course, to create something positive, right? Because that's something that will lift us up. Now, I heard that magical number of 17 seconds, that if for 17 seconds, like say I look at the jar of cookies and I start feeling, I don't know, fat, right? And guilty, right? And I heard that, if for 17 seconds I try to catch myself and tell myself something, no, I am on my way to losing weight, or look at me, I am really struggling, but I'm not going to reach out for that cookie. So if 17 seconds I can maintain, and then it's going to be easier to have that next spin. Is that something from, does science have any proof of that? Does science have any magical time for that spiral to go either up or down?
I'm not aware of the studies that really measured response, but we have a number of studies that show if you are able to redirect yourself from that trigger on that negative emotion, you are able to change. And the reason is that the brain has the so-called fight or flight response. When we are under stress, we don't have time to think. We perceive a threat from the environment. Oftentimes, all the glucose goes away from the thinking part of the brain. And we are prepared either to fight or flight or kind of dive into that unproductive behavior. But if we take that few seconds to readdress the situation, and if our prefrontal cortex can actually intervene and say, that's okay. That's not the end of the world. There's no tiger hiding behind that tree.
Mm.
We can regulate our emotions better. And I think that's what you're really talking about, is the ability to cut in and regulate your emotions. And what we do know from science is the sooner you notice that you're going to spiral down, the faster you come in and start telling yourself a different story, or kind of having some other cue that's going to remind you to put yourself into a more positive state of mind, the more chances you have to actually overcome that habit. And one of the things when I work with my clients, and that's very successful, is to have some sort of anchors, I call them. And anchors are like little reminders. It could be a little crystal in your pocket that you carry around throughout the day, or something that you constantly see or you can touch. And that's a thing that's going to remind you in a difficult situation to rewire, to reprogram, to rethink the situation. It's like that, alarm that goes off on our phones, or some kind of, it wakes us up, right, from sleep. Here, it wakes us up from the trigger. And if you have something around the house that can serve, that you can charge with that positive intention and that positive energy, and you carry it in your pocket, and every time you start getting nervous, you kind of touch it, and it's a reminder for you to rethink the situation, that's a good way. Because, again, brain loves rituals. There are a lot of rituals better in all of the traditions and healing practices. Rituals play a huge part. And what really coincides with science is that the brain loves rituals because it's a series of steps that are programmed, and you know what to expect. And our brains love that kind of expectation, because that's how the whole brain operates. What's going to happen? I'm going to make predictions. If you're right, I'm going to reinforce it. If I'm wrong, I'm going to fine-tune it. So when you create a ritual around a habit, it's going to be a very powerful mechanism for the brain to learn the new behavior. So that's why I'm all about creating easy steps and rituals to help people move away from pre-programmed default reactions.
Well, this is really interesting, Anastasia, and I love this idea of anchors. I totally believe in them. I actually pre-programmed my phone. Now we have technology, with the little messages that they just show up once, whenever I want to change my habits, and believe me, I have lots of them.
Don't we all?
Yes. When I was actually trying, because it's been a long path for me to self-love, that was affirmations that were kicking in, or even a question, how are you feeling about yourself right now? Those
that's
things.
Great.
Yeah, so thank you. But also what I liked is that you kind of tapped into another area where you talk about rituals and how we interrupt that flow. Pretty much we tell ourselves a story. That story is either dark or it's a positive and optimistic story. And we want to switch to the optimism, right, as much as we can. So why are stories important for the brain? And if yes, then why?
That's a great question, Marina. And I love stories because I've been working kind of in the area of communication for a while. And storytelling, I think, is such a great mechanism to do a lot of things and convey information and learn new things. And the reason stories are important is because stories are how our brain processes the world. If you think about centuries and centuries back, people sat around the fire and they told stories. That's how this community wisdom was passed from generation to generation. That's how children were taught certain things. So stories is really how our brain thinks about the world. But what's interesting about it is that there are certain information that may be factual in a story, and then when there is not enough information, when let's say there is a gap, the brain is going to be very quick to fill in that gap with some kind of additional value-based or whatever it is that brought up that particular association with that information. And sometimes it can be true, but sometimes it's not. And what's interesting is because stories seem so natural and organic, we kind of buy into them. as I say, we live by our stories, and we oftentimes don't question our stories until something happens that makes us to look back and reevaluate. But this is how a brain works, is that it fills in the gaps based on your experiences in life, based on the teachings that came down from your family, whatever it is that made you kind of have a certain value system. So I think one of the power of the stories, when we realize that we live by our stories that may not be true, is that we can rewrite the story and we can create a different, let's say, chapter in our book of stories.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. So that gives a lot of hope too. So do you have any specific techniques on how to rewrite your story? How do we do it?
Well, I think it's first of all, you kind of want to think about who are the main characters of your story. And some characters are obvious. It could be your family, it could be your spouse, it could be your child. But then there are some less kind of visible characters. It could be people from your past that had certain influence on you. It could be some gurus or some experts that somehow pass down the wisdom, or it could be sort of a random encounter that sometimes can create, especially in childhood, can create a very profound experience. So you start thinking about who are the characters and what voice am I speaking in, because that's what's interesting about the story. We all have our kind of voice inside of us, but oftentimes it gets kind of quieted because we assume the voices of other people, our bosses, our teachers, media. A huge, loud, oftentimes pretty obnoxious voice too comes from some of the mainstream media. So we have to really stop and say, am I really speaking in my true voice here? Or am I influenced by somebody or somewhere? So the first step I would say is try to find where is that true voice, and then look at the circumstances of your story. I was talking about how important the cues are to the brain. What is the context where the undesirable behaviors occur? How could you change the circumstances of that story? Where is the conflict? Every good story has a conflict. And it's sort of a funny truism in life. I think that we all want a very nice life without lots of turbulations, but the truth of the matter is that conflict and contrast is what gives meaning to our life. And oftentimes it's really a range of emotions. That's some sorrow and some grief and some sadness is really what make happiness and joy so much more desirable, and we appreciate it more. So I think we need to understand that as humans, we are wired to have a range of emotions. We just don't want to get stuck in any of those negative emotions for long. But we can appreciate them when they come. One of the effective kind of linguistic strategies to lessen the burden of that emotion is to name it. So if you feel angry, don't try to negate it or don't try to feel bad about you being angry. It's okay. You just name it. I'm angry. And what we find from studies is that that simple label already diminishes the influence of the emotion on your body. So you can actually intervene. So I think we have to look at the stories, the conflicts in the stories, and see where they are, what kind of emotions they generate, when they get escalated, and how we can learn to regulate our emotions better, whether it's through breathing exercises, through labeling, through journaling, through refocusing on something that is more positive, like gratitude practices or some kind of mindfulness practices. So those would be, I would say, some of the ideas how you can start working with the story. There's really a lot of depth in that process, so probably beyond the time that we have to go in that detail. But just to give a flavor is that you kind of unpack the story or unpack your assumptions and you start creating new vision where you want to take it.
Interesting, Anastasia. I'm sure that our audience would want to continue talking about this more and learning about you and Brain Alchemist. By the way, Anastasia's website is www.brainalchemist.com. brainalchemist.com. And Anastasia, can you just tell us a couple of things that you you could help our audience with?
Well, there's a lot of my clients come from the field of communication. I'm a sort of linguist. I'm a lawyer by training, and a lot of it has my work has to do with public speaking. For example, that's a big one. Fear of public speaking, as you probably know, is one of the greatest fears out there. Only I think kind of death is the first takes the first
Oh
place.
my
Fear of
goodness.
death, and then the next one is fear of public speaking. Now, why it happens? It's because we're again programmed by the brain to be very reactive to what people think of us. We all know how to speak. We all know our stuff. And no matter what the titles are and what our kind of level of expertise is, people still afraid because they're afraid of what other people think of me. And so working with the brain on overcoming that status fear, because again, we evolutionarily developed to measure up because status is a threat. We start taking it, and I help people overcome that fear of public speaking.
And that's related to self-love too in a lot, right? That's
absolutely, absolutely, because it goes to self-esteem, as you were talking about. It also goes about the love for what you do, because ultimately what you realize, and what a lot of my clients realize, is that the message is more important than them. And that's kind of like a big lesson. It's not about you, it's about whatever it is that you bring to other people that they need to know.
Like I always say, get out of your own way and let your mission just go ahead of you, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right. Same
Wonderful.
happens with conflicts. When we are in the midst of conflicts, our brain gets hijacked, but there are ways to overcome it and help you develop a positive, nurturing communication that really speaks the language of love and tells the story of love towards yourself and ultimately towards other people.
Wow, this is really fascinating. Thank you so much, Anastasia, for your time, for your wisdom. And if you want to connect with Anastasia further, read the amazing blog that she's writing, visit her site again at www.brainalchemist.com. Thank you so much. Lots of
Thank you.
love to you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. It was a great conversation. Thank you, Marina, and best of luck in your very important work on self-love. We all need it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.